Hey, Janet, you're a bit quieter than usual. What's going on?
I even got a text from someone encouraging me to be a little more succinct. So,
Hello and welcome to the Grand Parade Podcast. Last week was a relatively slow one as far as the schedule was concerned, with only a Tuesday council meeting and a Thursday African Descent Advisory Committee meeting. After a months-long budget process, Halifax now has a budget thanks to Mayor Andy Fillmore. Also thanks to Mayor Andy Fillmore, next year's budget process is going to be wildly different than this year's was. Also last week, Halifax once again found itself standing in the long shadow of its more than slightly racist history. But before that, if you are a healthy person who doesn't spend a lot of time on the internet, you may have missed that my newspaper, also called Grand Parade, is scheduled to launch on Monday, May 5th and should be available at Atlantic News. I've ordered some paper samples, I've hired some freelancers, and I'm starting to get excited. Buying paper and paying people to tell this city's stories cost money, and thanks to the people who have already subscribed, I should be able to pay the writers of the first 3 issues enough money that the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives won't yell at me, just frown a little bit in disappointment. But with about 120 subscribers, I can sustainably get writers for every issue and get a begrudging, metaphorical nod of approval from the Centre of Policy Alternatives. So, if you can afford it, and if you want to see independent journalism in your city, or if you just want to see a physical newspaper in your city again, head on over to grandparade.news and subscribe. Council's Tuesday, April 8th meeting started with the Budget Committee, which voted to ratify the budget, with Councillors Laura White, Sean Cleary, and Virginia Hinch voting no. Then the budget was sent to Council, which met right after the budget meeting, also on Tuesday morning, to be ratified. While it is not unusual for people to vote against the budget once it gets to Council at the final meeting, it is unusual for someone to explain their reasoning before the vote. Just to be nerdy for a second, it's not that it's not allowed. Debate is a structural part of almost every motion of Council. It's just that no one usually uses the final debate to speak. Councillor Laura White did, though, when she explained her vote against the budget, saying this.
I just wanted to say I'm voting no on the budget and why I'm doing that. I just wanted to explain because I understand we've been through a big process and we've all given and taken, and I respect the process. I just wanted to comment that drawing from reserves is something I'm really uncomfortable with that we've done there. So that was the biggest thing for me, that I would like to vote no against that, and I don't want to be doing that in the future. So that's the biggest one. I also felt like we were doing small things here and there, but we weren't willing to even take a closer look at the police budget, and I think we should be willing to do that too. So those are the 2 major reasons.
The bad news for Councillor White is that Council again voted to approve the budget they'd approved just minutes ago as the Budget Committee. The $1.3 billion operational budget was good news for Mayor Fillmore, who campaigned on keeping the tax rate flat, which Council did. The good news for Haligonians is that even though Council may have made some questionable decisions in this year's budget, our councillors are being given an opportunity to correct any mistakes they may have made. And any mistakes any council in Halifax's history may have made, thanks to a motion from Mayor Andy Fillmore, who followed through with his threat of budget reform. Simply put, Fillmore's motion wants city staff to find efficiencies, increase and/or diversify municipal revenues, and make the city sustainable. This new framework needs to be done by June so that it can be used in next year's budget process. And next year's budget itself needs to be done by March 1st, 2026, so that Halifax can be first in line for bids on capital tenders. At the risk of being dramatic, this motion has the potential to be as consequential a policy in shaping Halifax as the April 1918 policy decision to fund the Halifax Relief Commission. And just a heads up here, this meeting had a lot of good and thoughtful debate from our councillors, and even before editing, I'm at 18 minutes of council clips for this episode. Hearing directly from your councillors about the coming fiscal reforms is why this episode runs longer than normal. This is essential policy work that will happen because Fillmore's motion passed in a series of split votes. Now, there is always concern whenever a politician uses the word efficiencies because it's often code for austerity. But there is reason to be optimistic that this motion is more than it appears. In my recap of the meeting on grandparade.news, I explain the inefficiency of land use and how that inefficiency affects the city's revenue collection, and how one civic address in Dartmouth Crossing gives Halifax a $22 million unsustainability problem to solve every year. But the fact that large multinational corporations on the edge of town paying way less in property taxes than local small business owners downtown is not a bug. It's a feature of municipal government. Here's Councillor Sam Austin continuing the computer analogy.
We basically are running 21st century cities on 1700s software is basically the situation. The division of powers and the Constitution have not done us any favors in terms of the complexities that now we address at the municipal level that no one ever envisioned that we'd be doing, and it's never really changed, and we remain creatures of the province, as people say. We get to do only as much as they allow us to, and that includes where we raise money. So there's some big picture thinking that will have to go into that. Otherwise, the only user fees we control are recreation fees, transit fees. As Councillor Cleary pointed out, development fees, we don't even have control of that right now. So we're limited by design, and it's not design of anyone around this room or in this chamber or previous councils going on back. So that's a challenge.
As for Austin's question at the end,
what happens, what do you envision if this passes in terms of budget adjustment next year? Because I'm going to guess that we're going to have things that are going to come up over the course of this year, reports that are going to come back with ideas for new programs, new spending on things that people have identified as important. If those sorts of motions land here in a report, does that then automatically become a piece that will then be flagged in the future budget to come as a pressure for council then to deliberate on?
Fillmore's motion is written a bit awkwardly and seemed to imply that councillors couldn't decide to add municipal programs. For example, if council wanted to add cricket as a sport offered by Parks and Rec, the motion kind of reads like they wouldn't have the power to do that. It turns out that council does still have the power to use their power, just not mid-fiscal year. They'll have to wait until budget time to change any annual municipal spending levels, aka municipal service delivery. Sports highlights are short, and politics highlights are long. In this case, prior to editing, 10 minutes long. And while I'm sure it will be at least slightly shorter than that after editing, you're about to hear a long clip from Councillors Patty Cuddle and then Sean Cleary, who between them lay bare the issue Council is really trying to solve with this budget reform motion first proposed by Mayor Fillmore.
So, holding the budget steady is assuming too that, everything else is remaining steady. We're in a period of accelerated growth. We have new residents, which are putting increased demands on our services. So I think that has to be factored in here as well. It's not just inflation, it's how much our city is growing in population as well, and what that means for transit, for recreation services, for 311 calls, for new streets and new snow plowing. So those are all important things to consider. I want to point out that I agree that it's not sustainable. We are not in a sustainable situation given the amount of work that we have ahead of us. It's important, I think, to keep in mind that of all the taxes that Canadians pay, their municipal taxes make up about 10%. Only 10% of tax pay go to the municipality. That was from a Federation of Canadian Municipalities study. One of the big calls nationally is to look for a new fiscal framework for municipalities because it isn't sustainable. Municipal taxes were never designed to pay for big infrastructure projects. We need those funds from the province, from the feds, to help us do our major infrastructure. And then it becomes a question, if we don't get those funds, what do we do? So, we're often, I feel, in a reactive position. There's a lot of proactive work we can do in setting ourselves up to take advantage of funding from other levels of government, but sometimes we're in a bit of a reactive phase two, whether it's dealing with emergencies like forest fires and floods or other things. So, good fiscal management is important, and so I agree that taking a look at things is always a good thing to do.
When we look at sort of the sustainability that's been talked about, that's really for us as a body to decide what are the core services that we think are important, because we're not going to agree, 16 or 17 of us, and so that has to be a consensus that we reach on what those are and what we want to invest in, because that has been alluded to, 80% of our revenue comes from property taxes, 80% of our budget are people, and so the only way to really get a handle on that is to stop hiring people or get rid of people. And so that's something that we have to think about, is what parts of the municipality do we want to grow? What parts do we want to maintain? Which parts do we want to prune back? But that's a question of what are core services? What's important to us as a body? And so that's a discussion that has to happen here. That's something the CAO can't unilaterally do. I mean, you could bring ideas and then we could debate them. But ultimately, it's going to have to be a decision of ours, which brings me to the revenues that we generate are restricted by our charter. And so when you look at the HRM charter, if you think about development fees as an example, well, the province froze those, so we can't increase them. We can't bring in new ones at the moment. And they've expended that. The other sources of revenue that we might have, if you look at other municipalities, they get much larger grants from their senior levels of government. So the province gives them much more money. But they also have more responsibility. So if you look at Toronto or Montreal or other places where they have housing and other responsibilities, the province gives them more money for those things. So you would expect that the proportion is going to be higher from those other levels of government where we don't have legislatively those responsibilities. We do, however, and have over the last few years stepped into those areas. And so we're spending municipal tax dollars on areas that really should be provincial. So my suggestion might be we have conversations with the provincial government and say, look, we're desperate. Councillor Cuddle talked about 10% of the taxes you pay in Canada coming from property taxes, but I forget what the figure is, but it's like 50 or 60% of the infrastructure in Canada is owned by municipalities. So we have the least amount of revenue to pay for the most amount of stuff. And so we need desperately some tax reform in how we do things. But that's not something we're going to solve at this table. That's something we have to go talk to the province and the feds about and say, give us more money for the stuff we're doing.
And even though during the budget season itself, some councillors may have made arguments that made you yell at your computer screen, hypothetically, it is important to remember that many of our councillors are still rookies. Unlike professional sports leagues like the NHL, where it is impossible to become a professional without the foundational skills of the game, people can become a professional councillor without first learning how to skate. The good news for Haligonians is that our rookies seem to be learning how to play the game at the highest level. Councillor Janet Steele, for example, told everyone what she had learned after her first budget season in the show.
I have a bit of a concern, even with the amendments, with the keeping the tax rate flat, just given all the geopolitical turmoil that we're in. While I certainly appreciated the budget process we went through, and thanks very much to Councillor Daigle Gammon for taking us through that process so expertly. I did find towards the end, we tried to turn ourselves into a bit of a pretzel to get to the flat tax rate. And we may have made some decisions. There may have been some things that, were $100,000 that, we didn't include because, we needed that number. So I'm not into the flat tax rate. I would like to maintain affordability, but I'm also really concerned about service levels. And I know I'm in a district where, transit is busting at capacity. We need improved transit. We also are very much in need of infrastructure, basic infrastructure like traffic signals and sidewalks on really busy streets. So I'm really concerned that if we vote for this flat tax rate, we're not going to see the investments that my residents are expecting. And maybe they would pay the extra $1.25 on their tax bill to keep that. So I don't like being locked in.
So on top of our councillors thinking a lot about how to fix this city, there are a few signs that this attempted fix may be different than efforts from the past. The city's top bureaucrats are very aware of the current state of disrepair of many municipal facilities, and there's mounting concern over Halifax's growing infrastructure deficit and a handful of other serious long-term issues caused by good political decisions like keeping taxes low and parking free. Here's Halifax's CAO, Kathy O'Toole.
So we have an infrastructure deficit that is worsening. We have a financial position that is worsening in terms of our level of reserves. And we have a bit of uncertainty around the federal budget.
Right.
So, we need to get through the federal election and see what the next federal government will put in place in terms of infrastructure funding programs, frankly, that would help us deal with some of the unfunded infrastructure projects that we know are in our long-range capital plans. The other things I will mention is that we have some indications, that we can have conversations with this provincial government around debt servicing and some of the constraints.
And on top of all of that, a few weeks ago, during budget season, councillors started debates on formerly untouchable things like ending free parking. And yet, still on top of all of that, there is the timing. This budget reform bill is coming back to council at around the same time the suburban plan is expected to reshape and densify suburban development patterns in the HRM, and right before council sets its strategic priorities. Or, in other words, this summer, council will decide what our city will look like for the next 50 or 100 years. They will decide how we're going to start down that path in the next 4 years, and they'll decide how, or I suppose if, we're going to pay to get there. And just in case that came across as overly dramatic, I just want to reiterate that we now understand how consequential some policy decisions, like funding the Post-Explosion Relief Commission or the World War II era Wartime Housing Limited, were to our lives today. But at the time, those were just rational policy responses to the crises of the day. If Halifax wants to survive another century, this suburban plan, this budget reform, and the strategic priorities will be a drastic and radical shift away from the status quo. This summer is shaping up to be yet another turning point, but this time, our council seems to understand the weight of Halifax's history. Bum, bum, bum. Speaking of turning points, let's turn to what happened for the rest of the meeting. Council voted to ditch Twitter, ultimately deciding that even though communicating with residents is essential, it's not really that cool to give Haligonians property tax dollars to a guy who's eviscerating the American government. Councillor David Hensby was the only vote to stay on Twitter. The city is going to let 100 more unhoused people ride the bus for free. Halifax will spend just over $1.2 million to take part in the federal Growing Canada's Community Canopies Fund. HRM's firefighters will have cancer screening next year. Council may collab with the Dartmouth Curling Club. And Deputy Mayor Tony Mancini asked for a staff report to get an update on the Auditor General's outstanding recommendations. Good news, says the CAO. She was working on this update anyway. The only other meeting this week was the African Descent Advisory Committee. They approved their meeting schedule and received a presentation from the Reverend Dr. Lynette Anderson, who told the committee about a time back in the 1990s when Halifax did a systemic racism. So tie up your laces, hop on your bike, or buckle your seatbelt, because we're going to church. Here's a sermon from the good Reverend.
And so the court decision in 1999 held that the Halifax Water was liable because of their CEO at the time, Mr. Carl Yates, misrepresented the community that any savings would be returned to our community to provide the water footage. Yates was found responsible on the basis of negligent misrepresentation. However, I believe that HRM and the province of Nova Scotia share equal, if not greater, responsibility. Why? Because nothing was done by Halifax Water without HRM Council's approval. Nothing done without the Department of Municipality or Municipal Affairs approval. They intentionally denied residents of Upper Hammonds Plains full fire protection, despite having the funds raised by us, secured by us. They installed hydrants not rated for fire fighting. This created a false sense of safety of which they are accountable. For the past 25 years, Halifax Water and the Nova Scotia government has profited from this neglect and this deception by providing inadequate infrastructure in Upper Hammonds Plains. This is absolutely unacceptable. We don't need apologies. We're not looking for symbolic gestures. We need real substantive action. We need pipes that flow with water. Let me move on. And so I can talk about legacy in action and the spirit of resilience, and that you can't have resilience without resistance. Well, they've helped us with our muscle in that sense. But in the shadow of historic wildfires that raged through our region, the community of Upper Hammonds Plains still stands without fire hydrants, living daily with the threat, but without the tools to fight it. You will see that perspective is from HRM, from Halifax proper, looking out to Upper Hammonds Plains. That's where the smoke rises from. The 2023 wildfires raised awareness of the absence of fire hydrants on sections of the Park Walk Road. What sections? I'm so glad you asked. Sections where non-Black people live don't have the fire hydrants. Park Walk Road runs through the community of Upper Hammonds Plains, and there are Caucasian members that reside on that street, and there's African Nova Scotians who reside on that street. And it is blatantly obvious on which side of the street you live. I would invite you to journey to Upper Hammonds Plains to witness. It was at the Upper Hammonds Plains community meeting that residents were informed that the fire hydrants in our community not only cannot be used for fire suppression. We were told by the fire department, I quote, "They are only there for training purposes," end quote. So these current fire hydrants are only cosmetic because the pipes are not big enough. We refer to them as dummy hydrants. There are no fire hydrants on Anderson Road. Water infrastructure should be a priority to transform and to protect our community as well. Hearing Halifax Water's account of past events left me in shock and the residents. I couldn't even respond appropriately that night because they presented a very interesting narrative that we knew all along the fire hydrants didn't work. I'll get into that later. And so it's not surprising for us. I just want to show you that there's no emergency exits, there's no egresses out of our community. This is what it looked like on that day when everyone was trying to get out of our community. Fire on both sides of the streets as we were exiting. I have video footage. I'm not going to show it tonight, but it's the footage that was captured by residents on Anderson Road as they were fleeing their homes. And again, this is an area without fire hydrants at all. If time permits, I would love to come back and show you how close the fire was to our backyards. Upper Hammonds Plains water main, it received news recognition on the Evening News Global, CTV. Yes. We were speechless that the very fire hydrant across from the historic first all-Black volunteer fire department in Canada does not work. We would have the chief of fire come to our community and insult our intelligence, saying that all the firefighters know that they don't work. Actually, they have a system in place to tell them as they go to fight fires which fire hydrants work and don't work. And I say, so that's why they come here repeatedly and try to hook up to our fire hydrants and have nothing. Thank God for Sabrina Ellison, our lifelong resident of our community, with a camera taking pictures as they stand in the middle of the street. Why won't any water come out of these fire hydrants? It's not a figment of my imagination. This fire right here happened after the wildfire. There was an explosion in our community. Yet again, The guy at the top, he knows, but the men on the street don't know, and they're trying to hook up to the fire hydrants. And again, in a panic, what is going on here? There's a glaring disparity. Two different realities on the same street. That's Park Walk Road. Can you tell which one has black residents and which have white? No, because it's the same street. The same street, but two different realities. The black residents receive inadequate water infrastructure, including fire hydrants not rated for fire suppression, while others receive full protection. I mean, they have pipes that are 16-inch. They have fire hydrants that are every 400 to 500 feet. Then you cross into the black community.
But as enraging as that all is, this was just a presentation to inform an advisory committee. No one's acting all that quickly to, do anything about any of that. Speaking of not acting quickly, this show is way too long for one that's recapping a week that only had 2 meetings. So that'll do it for me today. Bye. Oh, that was too early. No, but that'll do it for me today. You can find me at Land of Sticks wherever @signs are bought and sold for free, which right now is Blue Sky. Oh my gosh. Which right now is Blue Sky. How much of this am I leaving in? Too much, probably. As always, you can find me at Land of Sticks wherever @signs are bought and sold for free. And grandparade.news is a place on the website? No, a place on the internet. The publication itself lives on the internet at grandparade.news. As I mentioned off the top of the show, I'm in the middle of a subscriber drive so that there can be stories about Halifax in this newspaper that aren't just about committee meetings at City Hall. I know the audience of this show finds committee meetings interesting, but does everyone in Halifax? Absolutely not. In fact, I would argue, not enough people. not nearly enough. Not nearly enough people. Anyways. grandparade.news to subscribe to the publication. I would really like it. I always kind of ad-lib the end of these shows, and they're always a little, I never know where I'm going to end up. But that, for real, will do it for me today. Land of Sticks on the socials, grandparade.news. If you're on your phone, why don't you open up that podcast app? Why don't you like, rate, review, subscribe, tell a friend, do all that stuff. But that'll do it for me today. Bye!